The pharynx is a muscular tube that connects the nasal cavity and oral cavity to the larynx and esophagus. The pharynx is composed of skeletal muscle and lined by mucous membrane dividing into three parts: the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The nasopharynx functions only in respiration, but both the oropharynx and laryngopharynx have digestive as well as respiratory functions. All of these can be seen clearly in a sagittal section of the head and neck. The upper portion of the pharynx, the nasopharynx, lies above the oral cavity here, and actually it is a continuation of the nasal cavity and functions only in respiration. Talking about the borders, the nasopharynx is bordered by the upper surface of the soft palate and uvular, then adjoins to the oropharynx inferiorly. The anterior aspect of the nasopharynx communicates through the conchae with the nasal cavities. Posteriorly and superiorly, it is mainly bordered by adenoid tonsils and a muscular structure covered by mucous membrane. Another important structure in nasopharynx is the pharyngeal opening of the auditory tube, also known as the eustachian tube. Let me draw here another diagram to clearly show it. The pharyngeal opening of the auditory tube, which is also called the eustachian tube, is located on the lateral walls of the nasopharynx here. The auditory tubes connect the middle ear to the pharynx and serve to equalize the barometric pressure in the middle ear with that of the ambient atmosphere. The second part of the pharynx is oropharynx, lying behind the oral cavity here. Anteriorly, it is mainly bordered by 1/3 of the tongue and by oral cavity, superiorly by soft palate, uvular, and nasopharynx, posteriorly by the laryngeal muscles lined by mucous membrane, and inferiorly by laryngopharynx and superior border of the epiglottis. It is the only part of the pharynx that is seen when you open the mouth. View of the mouth to make some points about additional structures in the oropharynx. It is important to note that on the lateral walls of the oropharynx we have palatine tonsils, and as we have mentioned above, they are the part of Waldeyr's ring. Sometimes the palatine tonsils may inflame, causing tonsillitis. Inflamed tonsils appear red and swollen. Symptoms include a sore throat, swollen and red tonsils, and fever. Another common disease of the pharynx, pharyngitis, is an inflammation of the pharyngeal mucosa. This disease is usually a disorder of children. On examination of the throat can be seen a pronounced redness of the mucous membrane of the pharynx. The main symptoms are a sore throat and redness of the pharyngeal walls. Other symptoms may include fever and maybe a cough. Streptococcal pharyngitis or strep throat is a common form of pharyngitis in children. In addition to the above-mentioned symptoms, streptococcal pharyngitis is also characterized by pus on the tonsils, disease, and glomerulonephritis. The last part of the pharynx, the laryngopharynx, also known as hypopharynx, is a caudal part of the pharynx. Let me draw here a proper diagram of the pharynx with its surrounded structures and show the borders of the laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx is here. Here we have the epiglottis, and over here is the oropharynx. Right here is your thyroid and cricoid cartilage, larynx, and esophagus. Specifically, The superior border of the laryngopharynx is the epiglottis and oropharynx, and its inferior border is the posterior surface of the cricoid cartilage of the larynx. At this point, it becomes continuous with the esophagus. The laryngopharynx communicates with larynx via the laryngeal inlet. One of the most important structures here is the epiglottis, the flap at the base of the tongue that keeps food from going into the trachea. In a clinical practice,